In 1606, a French explorer named Samuel de Champlain sailed along the coast of what would become Cape Cod, guiding his ship toward a harbor on the New England shore. And then, according to his log, he stopped. He did not dare go in. The water ahead of him was so thick, with oyster reefs breaking the surface, that he judged it too dangerous to sail through a shallow forest of shellfish so vast it would wreck a ship. He named the place Oyster Port. 400 years later, that same harbor, and countless others like it, up and down the coast, had gone quiet and green and half dead. The reefs gone, the water murky, the shellfish that had once armored the seabed reduced to a memory. This is the story of how the oysters of Massachusetts were driven almost to nothing, of what their disappearance did to the water that everyone had assumed was just naturally murky, and of a small group of scientists and townspeople who bet that the fastest way to clean a poisoned harbor was not a billion-dollar sewage plant, but to bring back the humble creature Champlain had once feared. And what happened when they did surprised even them. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what an oyster actually is, because it is far stranger and more important than the thing on a restaurant plate. An oyster is a filter. It feeds by drawing water in across its gills and straining out the tiny particles of algae and organic matter suspended in it, and in the process, it pulls the murk right out of the sea. A single adult oyster can filter as much as 50 gallons of water in a single day, roughly a bathtub's worth, cleaning it one mouthful at a time. It does this constantly, tirelessly, pumping water across its gills, hour after hour, trapping the particles that cloud the sea and either eating them or binding them up and dropping them harmlessly to the bottom. Multiply that by the countless millions of oysters that once carpeted a harbor, and you begin to see what these animals were really doing. They were the kidneys of the coast, an immense living filtration system that ran day and night for free, keeping the water clear enough that sunlight could reach the seagrass on the bottom, that fish could thrive, that the whole estuary could breathe. By some estimates, the oysters that once filled a great bay could filter the entire volume of its water in a matter of days. When they vanished, that filtering simply stopped, and the water was left to fend for itself. And they did something else, something that would turn out to matter enormously. They pulled nitrogen out of the water. Oysters do not just clear the murk. Through their feeding, their waste, and the rich community of life that gathers on their reefs, they strip out nitrogen, the nutrient that in excess is the single greatest killer of coastal waters. Some of that nitrogen they lock away in their own growing shells and tissue. Some is captured by the tiny creatures and bacteria that colonize the reef, and some is transformed by natural processes on the reef bottom and released harmlessly back into the air as ordinary nitrogen gas. A healthy reef, in other words, does not just filter the water, it acts as a nitrogen sink, permanently drawing down the very pollutant that was drowning the estuary. And oysters build. Piling their shells one atop another across generations, they raise hard, complex, three-dimensional reefs. And those reefs became a haven for life, sheltering as many as 100 other species: the shrimp, the crabs, the eels, the young of the very fish that fed coastal communities. Scientists came to call oyster reefs the coral reefs of the north, and like a breakwater of living stone, those reefs also blunted the force of waves and storms, absorbing the energy of the sea before it could tear at the shore, holding the coastline in place against erosion. For millennia, they were the beating heart of the New England estuary. Long before Champlain, the indigenous peoples of the coast had harvested these same reefs sustainably for thousands of years, leaving behind great mounds of discarded shell called middens that still mark the shoreline as monuments to how central the oyster once was to life here. The reefs were so vast and so productive that early colonists wrote of oysters a foot long, of beds so dense they formed islands at low tide, and then, in a little more than a century, people almost erased them. The destruction came from every direction at once. Oysters were harvested on an industrial scale to feed growing cities, dredged up faster than they could ever rebuild. Whole reefs scraped clean by boats dragging heavy iron rakes across the bottom. Their reefs were physically torn from the seabed. Pollution and silt from a developing coastline smothered the survivors, and the shells themselves were carted off, ground up for lime, burned to make cement, or scattered on fields to reduce the acidity of the soil, so that even the hard foundation the next generation needed to grow on was stripped away. It was a slow, thorough dismantling of a system that had taken thousands of years to build. Across the country, the scale of the collapse is almost hard to believe. A little over a century ago, American fishermen were landing something like 1.5 billion pounds of oysters a year. Today, that figure has fallen to under 30 million pounds, a decline of around 98%. Wild oyster reefs became, by one widely cited assessment, the most severely degraded marine habitat on Earth, with an estimated 85% of them gone worldwide, in place after place. An animal that had been one of the most abundant creatures on the coast was reduced to scattered remnants, and in some harbors to nothing at all. And as the oysters vanished, the water they had been quietly cleaning for thousands of years began to change. Nobody at first connected the two. The estuaries grew murkier, greener, choked in summer with blooms of algae, and people simply assumed that was how these waters were, or blamed it vaguely on modern life. The real culprit was nitrogen, and it was pouring in from every septic system, every lawn, every road along the developed coast, feeding explosive growths of algae that clouded the water, blocked the light, and as they died and rotted, sucked the oxygen out of the sea until fish and shellfish suffocated. Scientists have a name for this slow strangling of a waterway: eutrophication, the process by which an overload of nutrients tips a living estuary into a green, oxygen-starved decline. The seagrass beds that had carpeted the harbor floor, starved of light beneath the algae, withered and vanished, and with them went the nurseries for fish and scallops. Coastal towns across Cape Cod found themselves facing a slow-motion catastrophe in their own harbors and ponds, and staring down the estimates to fix it. The conventional way, with sewers and treatment plants, the projected cost ran into the billions of dollars, sums that could bankrupt small communities, with some estimates for the region reaching $4 to $6 billion. If a story about a poisoned coastline and an unlikely living solution hiding in plain sight is worth your time, take a moment to subscribe, because what a handful of people in one Cape Cod town did next turned the whole expensive problem on its head. The town was Wellfleet, on the outer arm of Cape Cod, a place with a shellfishing tradition stretching back centuries, the very harbor Champlain had once refused to enter. In 2010 and 2011, a coalition came together around a radical, almost old-fashioned idea. Instead of spending untold millions piping the nitrogen away, what if they simply brought back the animal that had been removing it for free since before human memory? The effort was led in large part by Dr. Anna-Maricha Franke, a marine scientist at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and the founder of the Green Harbors Project, who approached coastal restoration through what she called biomimicry, the practice of solving human problems by imitating the designs and strategies of nature. Working alongside her was Kurt Felix, a member of the town's wastewater planning committee, who saw in the oyster a way to clean Wellfleet's water at a fraction of the cost of concrete and pipe. Their method was elegantly simple, and it worked with the ocean rather than against it. The single hardest thing for a baby oyster to find in a degraded harbor is a clean, hard surface to attach to, because oyster larvae must cement themselves to something solid to survive. And ideally, that something is the shell of another oyster. A young oyster, drifting in the water as a microscopic larva for its first weeks of life, gets exactly one chance to find a home. If it settles on soft mud, it dies. It needs to touch down on something hard and clean, and in a healthy reef, that surface is the accumulated shell of the generations that came before. But the shells were gone, carted away for a century, leaving the larvae nowhere to land and the reef unable to renew itself. So the team gave them back. They gathered hundreds of tons of recycled shell, old surf clam and oyster shell from processing plants, a material called culch, and they spread it across a 2-acre patch, of the harbor bottom where Duck Creek and Mayo Creek meet, laying down a fresh foundation for a reef. Then they let nature do the rest, and nature answered with astonishing speed. The wild oyster larvae already drifting in the water, which for years had found nowhere to settle, now had a place to land. They settled onto the culch by the millions and began to grow. In just the first year, that 2-acre pilot site established around 4 million oysters, with millions more expected to settle each year after. Where there had been bare, lifeless mud, a living reef was rising, and it was already filtering an estimated 140 to 200 million gallons of water every single day, and pulling thousands of pounds of nitrogen out of the harbor each year, exactly the poison the town had been prepared to spend millions to remove. But the true measure of success was not the oyster count. It was the water itself. As the reef grew and filtered and pulled the excess nutrients from the estuary, the monitoring data told a stunning story. Water quality at the pilot site improved from what the Environmental Protection Agency classified as severely degraded to, by the same standards, excellent. A stretch of harbor that had been effectively dying was, within a few short years, clean and alive again, not by the grace of an expensive machine, but by the labor of the animal that had always done the job. And the recovery did not stop at the water. As the oysters returned, so did the web of life that depends on them. The reef drew in the shrimp and the crabs, and the small fish that shelter among the shells. Biodiversity flooding back into a place that had been barren. The whole ecosystem reassembling itself around the returning keystone. A single restored reef can host 100 different species, and researchers elsewhere have watched life come flooding back onto devastated bottom within weeks of laying down a few oyster cages, the animals arriving as if they had been waiting all along for someone to rebuild the foundation. What the oysters rebuilt was not just cleaner water, but a functioning coastal community, the kind Champlain had sailed into 4 centuries before. This was not a quick or effortless miracle, and the work is far from finished. Oyster restoration is slow, patient labor, dependent on the survival of fragile young oysters through disease, predators, and the ever-present threat of the very pollution the reefs are meant to fix. The scientists behind it were always careful to say it was no overnight cure, that it would take sustained effort over years to build oyster populations large enough to matter at scale. And oysters cannot single-handedly solve a coastline's entire nitrogen crisis. They are one powerful tool among several, most effective alongside smarter wastewater management rather than in place of it. But the proof of concept was undeniable. Over the years that followed, the restoration in Wellfleet Harbor expanded far beyond that first 2-acre patch. Across roughly 35 acres of restored oyster habitat, the harbor's oyster population climbed into the range of 200 million animals, an almost unimaginable recovery from the barren bottom of a few years before, and the idea spread up and down the Massachusetts coast, from Buzzards Bay to Boston Harbor. Conservation groups, towns, and scientists took up oyster restoration as a serious, cost-effective strategy for cleaning coastal water, protecting shorelines, and rebuilding marine life. In Boston Harbor, a nonprofit began working to return oysters to waters where they had been absent for decades, testing whether the old filter feeders could once again survive in the heart of a modern city. On the Cape, towns like Orleans experimented with floating oysters over their nitrogen-choked ponds as a cheaper alternative to sewers. In 2025, the Nature Conservancy partnered with the state's Division of Marine Fisheries and federal agencies on an ambitious new plan to restore between 10 and 20% of the region's original oyster habitat, town by town along the coast, targeting communities from Westport to Fairhaven to Mashpee to Bourne. The animal Champlain had feared was becoming once again the guardian of the harbors. In the end, it comes back to that explorer in 1606, turning his ship away from a harbor so full of life it blocked his path, and to the scientists and townspeople 400 years later who looked at the murky, lifeless water that remained and understood, at last, what had been taken away. The oyster's story is a quiet rebuke to the idea that every environmental problem requires us to engineer a grand solution from scratch, because sometimes The machine that heals a broken ecosystem is not a machine at all, but a living thing that spent millions of years perfecting the very job we now pay billions to do badly. We had spent a century treating the oyster as nothing more than food, a thing to be dredged up and eaten until it was gone, never seeing that its real value was in the water it left behind. Bring back the oyster, and the water remembers how to be clean. And if you want more true stories like this one, where the smallest and most overlooked creatures turn out to hold the health of an entire world in their grasp, subscribe, and the next one will be waiting for you.